I had been working night shift at Meridian Private Medical Center for 7 months. And in that time, I had learned to become invisible. Not in a sad way, in a useful way. Night nurses learn fast that rich patients don't really see you. You're a pair of hands that adjusts an IV drip. A shadow that appears with medication and disappears before they have to make eye contact. At Meridian, where the suites on the 4th floor cost $4,000 a night and came with a dedicated concierge and a menu that looked like a fine restaurant, the staff was basically furniture with a pulse. I didn't mind. Being overlooked had its advantages. Before nursing, I was a finance auditor at a mid-sized accounting firm in Chicago. I was good at it. I noticed patterns, inconsistencies, numbers that didn't line up the way they were supposed to. That skill didn't go away when I changed careers. It just redirected. I changed careers the year after my brother Owen died. The police called it an accident. A hit and run on the Eisenhower Expressway, 11:30 on a Tuesday night. Owen had been working for a consulting firm that, as I later discovered, did a significant amount of business with people who didn't like loose ends. He had called me 2 days before he died and said, "I found something I wasn't supposed to find." He didn't tell me what. He said he'd explain everything when he saw me. He never saw me again. I spent 2 years being angry before I got organized about it. I started collecting information the way I used to organize spreadsheets. Methodically, quietly, without drawing attention to myself. The accounting firm, the consulting contracts, the names that appeared over and over in certain types of transactions. By the time I started nursing school, I had a private encrypted folder with 3 years' worth of financial records, meeting logs, and photographs. I wasn't ready to use any of it yet. I was still building the picture. Then the man, in room 412, checked in, and the picture suddenly included people I recognized. His name was Harlan Steele. I knew the name before I ever saw his chart. Anyone who followed Chicago's private real estate sector knew that name. On paper, he ran Steele Capital Group, which developed luxury condominiums along the lakefront and had fingers in half the major construction projects in the metro area. Off paper. In the files I had been building quietly for 2 years. His company appeared in connection with money movement patterns that didn't match legitimate development timelines. He was recovering from a routine surgery and was expected to be discharged in 48 hours. His wife, Isabel, had been there every single day. She was warm in the way that genuinely kind people are warm. She smiled at me when I came in, thanked me by name each time, asked once how my shift was going. She was the kind of person who noticed the furniture. On the 3rd night, her parents arrived. I knew they were her parents because I overheard her introduce them in the hallway. My father, Russell. My mother, Norma. Harlan's security man shook hands and let them through. I was at the nurse's station, updating charts. I looked up the way I always did when something passed through my peripheral vision that didn't quite fit. Nothing dramatic. Just a flicker. Russell moved wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. He walked through the hallway with his hands in his jacket pockets, smiling and nodding, and every single thing about his body was performing calm while the rest of him was terrified. I had seen that particular combination before. In my brother, in the weeks before he died. I kept watching. Over the next 90 minutes, I noticed other things. 2 men in the 4th floor waiting area, supposedly there for a patient in 408. The man in 408 had no visitors listed on his intake form. These men had been there since 6 in the evening. It was now past 9. They hadn't spoken to anyone. One of them had a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. A man in gray maintenance coveralls who had walked past suite 412 4 times in an hour. There was no maintenance work scheduled on the 4th floor tonight. I had pulled the building log 3 weeks ago during a minor HVAC situation, and checking the log had since become a habit. Russell was checking his phone every 6 minutes. I timed it. He sat in the corner of the suite while Isabel and my patient talked, and every 6 minutes his hand went to his pocket and came out again, and he stared at whatever was on that screen for exactly 3 seconds before putting it away. Norma kept touching Isabel's arm. Not the way a mother touches her daughter's arm to be affectionate. The way you touch someone when you're trying to memorize them. I thought about Owen. I thought about the phone call I never got in time, the warning that never came. I thought about how simple it would have been if someone had just said something. I waited until I had a legitimate reason to enter the suite, medication check at 9:45, and I went in with my clipboard and my most unremarkable expression. Isabel was showing her mother something on her phone. Russell stood by the window with his back to the room. Harlan was watching the door when I came in, which told me he had trained himself to always watch the door. I moved to the IV pole first, making small adjustments that didn't need to be made, keeping my back to the room. When I went to check his vitals, routine, expected, I leaned close to read the monitor. "The two men in the waiting area," I said quietly, barely a breath. "They're not here for any patient, and the man in maintenance coveralls is on his 4th pass. I think tonight is a problem." I felt him go very still. His blood pressure read fine on the monitor. His face didn't change at all. "My father-in-law," he said, equally quiet. "Is he part of it?" I didn't answer immediately. I wrote something on my clipboard. Moved to the other side of the bed to check the secondary line. "I don't know what the plan is," I murmured, "but he's been checking his phone every 6 minutes, and your mother-in-law looks like she's saying goodbye." Harlan's jaw tightened, just barely. I would have missed it if I hadn't been watching. "Name. I'm the night nurse. I'll find out anyway. Cora." He held out his hand the way a patient does when being polite, and when I took it, there was a folded slip of paper against his palm. 2 words written beneath his room number: "Tell Jared." I pocketed it as I gathered my clipboard, said loudly, "For the room, I'll be back at 11 for the evening round," and left. Jared was Harlan's head of security. A quiet man in his 40s, who stood in the hallway outside the suite and radiated the specific energy of someone who had never once been surprised in his life. He gave me a measured look when I approached. I handed him the slip. He read it in 2 seconds, looked up. "How long have you been watching?" "About 2 hours. What do you do before this?" "Finance auditing." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but a recalibration. "Stay close," he said, "and stay out of the sight line of those 2 men in the waiting room." What happened next unfolded in less than 20 minutes, but it felt much longer from inside it. Jared made calls. Quietly. Men appeared at the stairwells, at the service elevator, at the delivery entrance on the building's north side. I watched from the nurse's station, pretending to update charts, my hands steadier than they had any right to be. At 10:17, the 2 men in the waiting area stood up. They moved toward 4412 with purpose, and a 3rd man, I hadn't tracked, came through the stairwell door at the same moment. Everything happened fast and contained. Jared's people moved. There were raised voices that cut off almost immediately, and the hallway outside 412 briefly became something that looked nothing like a hospital corridor. I had already moved. Not because anyone told me to. Because I had been in that suite, and I knew the service exit was through the bathroom utility access, and I knew that men coming through the front would push everyone toward the back, and I knew, in the particular way that pattern recognition works, the way it worked when I caught discrepancies in quarterly reports, that the service exit was the actual point. I got to the utility door at the same moment the man in maintenance coveralls reached it from the outside. He had not expected a nurse. I shoved the door against him with everything I had, held it, grabbed the nearest crash cart handle to brace against it, and screamed Jared's name as loud as my lungs allowed. Jared was there in 8 seconds. It felt like 8 years. Later, I sat in the family waiting room with a cup of coffee. I wasn't drinking while Jared and 2 other men worked through security footage on a laptop at the table. Harlan sat across from me. Isabel was in the hallway wrapped in a blanket that made no practical sense, given the warmth of the building. The way people wrap themselves in blankets when what they actually need is for the world to make sense again. "Tell me what you see," Harlan said, turning the laptop toward me. The footage was from a parking garage 6 blocks from the hospital. 3 nights ago. Russell and Norma walking toward a car with its engine already running. 2 men getting out. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. I watched Russell's posture change across those 11 minutes. He started with his arms crossed, ass chin up, some residual attempt at dignity. By the end, he was nodding at everything, his shoulders curved inward, the specific shape of a man who has run out of options and knows it. Norma cried throughout. How much? I asked. Around 600,000, Jared said. Personal loans from an investment group that was a collection front. They'd been paying minimums for 3 years, and the balance kept climbing. $600,000. I thought about how fast a number like that becomes a different kind of number when someone decides to stop being patient. They told Russell and Norma it was about leverage, Harlan said, his voice level. That the men would take Isabel out through the service exit, hold her somewhere safe, and I would agree to a financial settlement. No one would get hurt, just business. They lied, I said. They always lie. He closed the laptop. The organization that placed those men, they don't negotiate. If they had gotten Isabel out of this building tonight, she would have been used to send a message, not as leverage, as a lesson to every other person who owed them money and thought about running. The room went quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when what's been said is too large to respond to immediately. Harlan had Jared bring Russell and Norma in. I stayed. I don't know exactly why, except that I had been part of this from the beginning, and leaving now felt dishonest. The way walking out of a conversation mid-sentence feels dishonest. They came in together, holding each other's hands, and when Isabel came in behind them and looked at her parents, at the people who had driven her here, who had been so warm and attentive all evening, who had touched her arm in that particular goodbye way, I watched her understand. The understanding didn't arrive all at once. It came in stages, like watching someone work through an equation they don't want to reach the end of. Jared played the parking garage footage. He played the footage from 2 days earlier, Russell at a diner on North Clark Street, passing an envelope across a table, receiving a phone in return. He showed them the text recovered from that phone. Service exit, 10:15. Keep her away from the windows. Isabel had not sat down. She stood in the center of the room with her arms folded tight across her chest. And by the time the footage ended, her face held something I couldn't fully read. Not anger, not grief exactly, but the expression of a person recalculating everything they have ever understood to be true about the people who loved them. You drove me here, she said to her mother, very quietly. You said you wanted to spend time with me while Dad was in town. You picked me up from my apartment. Norma made a sound I won't forget. We didn't know they would hurt you. Russell's voice was wrecked. I swear to God, we thought. They said it was just leverage. They said Harlan would pay, and it would be done, and nobody would be. You kept me at the window. Isabel's voice stayed quiet, which was somehow worse than if she had raised it. You kept pointing at the lights on the lake. You were keeping me at the window. Away from the service exit, where she couldn't see the hallway, where she would be easy to move. Neither Russell nor Norma said anything. Get them out, Harlan said. Not loudly, in the tone of someone who has already made every decision that needs to be made. Separate rooms. Nobody leaves without my authorization. When the door closed behind them, Isabel stood very still for a long moment. Then she sat down and put her face in her hands. In the weeks that followed, the organization that had sent those men didn't survive the attention that Harlan's resources, combined with the financial records I had been building for 2 years, brought down on it. The records I had, transaction logs, shell company structures, the accounting firm contracts that tied back to the same network responsible for my brother's death, turned out to be exactly what a federal task force had needed to connect a series of financial crimes that had been investigated separately for years. Felix Shin, the man who had met with Russell in that parking garage, was arrested at O'Hare trying to board a flight to Zurich. He faced charges in 3 jurisdictions. I watched the news report from the break room at Meridian and drank bad hospital coffee, and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized I had been holding for 3 years. Harlan called me the following Thursday. He not to the hospital, but to a corner office on the 52nd floor of a building on Wacker Drive, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the lake that would have been beautiful if I hadn't been too distracted to look at it. He offered me a position: intelligence analyst, pattern recognition, financial forensics, threat assessment. The salary was a number I had to read twice. Full benefits, private security clearance, and access to resources that made my 2-year encrypted folder look like a scratch pad. "You saw something that 12 trained security professionals missed," he said. "I don't know exactly what to call that, but I know I need it close." "I saw a father checking his phone too often," I said. "Most people wouldn't know that mattered." I thought about Owen, about the Eisenhower Expressway on a Tuesday night, about the phone call that came too late. "Somebody should have warned my brother," I said. "I've spent 3 years trying to figure out how to be the person who warns people." Harlan was quiet for a moment. Then he slid the contract across the desk. "That's exactly why I want you. I don't need more security. I need someone who sees what's wrong before it gets loud." I signed it. That evening, Isabel called me herself. She asked if I would come to dinner sometime. "Not as an obligation," she said quickly, but because she genuinely wanted to. She wanted to thank me properly, somewhere that wasn't a hospital room. "I'm still figuring out what any of this looks like going forward," she said. Her voice was steady but careful, the way a voice becomes when it has learned to be careful. "My parents. I don't know what that is yet. Maybe nothing for a long time. Maybe something different someday. I honestly don't know." "You don't have to know yet," I said. "No." A pause. "I just keep thinking about you walking into that room and saying something when you had every reason not to, when it wasn't your problem, when nobody asked." I didn't tell her about Owen then. I would eventually. That night I just told her I would come to dinner. At their home, not a restaurant, which she had already made clear she wasn't ready for. Where the people at the table were accounted for, and the exits were known. I drove home through Chicago with the windows down, late summer air coming in off the lake, thinking about all the years I had spent building a picture I didn't know how to use. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting until I knew enough. It turned out the moment didn't wait for me to be ready. It arrived in the middle of a night shift, in the 4 seconds I spent leaning close to a hospital bed. And the only thing that mattered in those 4 seconds was whether I said something or I didn't. I said something. Everything else followed from that. Owen had known something too. He just never got his 4 seconds. I think about that a lot, about how thin the line is between a warning given and a warning swallowed, about how many terrible things live inside that silence. The moment between seeing and speaking, when a person decides that it isn't their problem, that they might be wrong, that the risk is too high, that someone else will handle it. I spent 3 years learning to close that silence. I don't intend to stop,